The electoral authorities in Venezuela extended by 24 hours the deadline for the registration of candidates to participate in the regional and municipal elections to be held on November 21st. Presidents Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping criticized the politicization of anti-COVID-19 vaccines and of the coronavirus origin theories. The Syrian anti-air defense repelled a new Israeli attack carried out by combat planes near the capital, Damascus. From the headquarters of TeleSUR English in Havana, this is From the South. I am Ray Gamos. The electoral authorities in Venezuela informed that the deadline for the registration of candidates to participate in the regional and municipal elections has been extended by 24 hours. The president of the National Electoral Council, Pedro Calzadilla, announced the extension of the deadline until September 4th. On Twitter, the entity stated that the decision, taken anonymously, was evaluated by the electoral authorities in order to facilitate the participation of the largest number of political organizations. The new extension for the registration of candidates will not have an impact on the electoral schedule for the next phases, the authorities said. On November 21st, 23 governors and 335 mayors will be elected in Venezuela, as well as 253 legislators at the national level. The Federal Supreme Court of Brazil heard the key arguments over the cold time frame that poses a threat to indigenous communities and their lands. The time frame law is defended by agricultural and industrial companies who claim that all indigenous people living in the lands at the time of the enactment of Brazil's 1988 constitution have a right to live in those territories. The natives opposed this interpretation, saying the law mentions no such requisite and reminded that their ancestors were robbed of their lands by colonizers. The outcome of this process could set the precedent for hundreds of similar land cases where agribusinesses intend to take the indigenous people's lands using the loopholes in legal devices. Bolsonaro, who promotes the agribusiness lobby and has launched an all-out modification process in the rules of protected lands in Brazil, said that if the Supreme Court did not act accordingly, then the country would fall in the hands of indigenous communities. Another racist and demagogic statement that resulted in the intensification of protests in Brasilia, where many Aboriginal descendants protest camped in the streets for weeks. The court's 11 justices had set the second part of the hearing for September 8. No date has been defined for the verdict.
For example, those who are fighting for land, they are small lands, and in these lands the indigenous people are camped on the side of the road, on the side of a farm, beside a road or beside a farm. There is no school, there is no health structure. It is necessary that it passes here first as quickly as possible through the Supreme Court, that the vote is in our favor so that these relatives who are fighting for the land have the conditions to cast their foot inside the territory.
At least 16 people were killed when a passenger bus and two trailers collided on the San Luis Rio Colorado highway in Mexico's northern state of Sonora. The state attorney general's office reported that another 22 people were injured and 6 of them are in serious condition. The National Guard reported that the accident occurred at about 5 a.m. local time, and the victims had the support of emergency service personnel. Only 7 of the 13 deceased have been identified, including a minor under 5 years of age. The accident occurred at kilometer 39 of the Sonoita Highway. Emergency responders continue to work at the scene. Former U.S. National Security Agency whistleblower Edward Snowden has dissected Apple's phone scanning plan, saying it not only blurs the line between what is and isn't private, but will eventually enable governments to meddle into intimate details of one's life. Snowden, who became world famous after exposing illegal mass surveillance by the U.S. and its allies during the Obama era, made the statement in an interview for the New Knowledge Education Marathon, an online event that marked the beginning of the academic year in Russia. Snowden has been among vocal critics of Apple's plan to scan content of all iPhones for criminal evidence. The tech giant says it wants to identify child pornography stored on devices, but skeptics see it as the latest corporate move to violate people's privacy under the guise of protecting children. This goes one step further from what many companies already do when they scan files that use store in cloud storage on provider servers.
And now they're telling your device what to look for. It's no longer a company question, it's a government question. So you have to ask yourself, can Apple say no to the United States government? Can they say no to the Russian government? Can they say no to the Chinese government? Can they say no to the German government, the French government, the British government? And of course the answer is no, not if they want to keep selling their products in these countries. That's dangerous. And now they're telling your device what to look for. And if they find something that's forbidden, that's against the law, for example, child abuse material is what they're talking about initially, but tomorrow it could be something else. It could be some new category of material. You don't know what they're scanning for.
The death toll after extensive flooding in the northeast of the United States caused by remnants of Hurricane Ida has risen to at least 49. The states of New Jersey, New York, Connecticut, Maryland, and Pennsylvania saw tornadoes of record rain and flooding, leaving large parts of the region underwater and states of emergency on Thursday. Videos on social media showed cars submerged on highways and water pouring into subway stations and homes after a wind-driven downpour shattered rainfall records and prompted an unprecedented flash flood emergency for New York City. Ida made landfall south of New Orleans as a Category 4 hurricane on Sunday, causing major damage across the states of Louisiana and Mississippi. About 540,000 children in the southwest of Haiti were or are now facing the possible reemergence of waterborne diseases, United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund warned on Friday. Severe conditions in southwestern part of the country, where over 500,000 children lack access to shelter, drinking water, and hygiene facilities, are rapidly increasing the threats of acute respiratory infections, diarrheal diseases, cholera, and malaria. UNICEF representative in Haiti warned that even cholera has not been reported since February 2019. Without urgent and firmer action, its reemergence is a real threat that is increasing by the day. A week after the earthquake, the international organization shipped more than 65,000 water purification tablets for warm bladders, 3 water treatment units, and family hygiene kits. We'll be right back after this very short break. Welcome back. In the Eastern Economic Forum of Vladivostok, Presidents Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping criticized the politicization of anti-COVID-19 vaccines and of the coronavirus origins theories. Russia's head of state urged to work toward eliminating the death due to the pandemic, noting that the developed economies produce the majority of vaccines to protect their own population, while very little is done to protect humanity as a whole. Both Putin and Xi agreed on the need to help Africa in the fight against the virus and criticized the West countries for talking about the need to humanize global relations but never coming through. Also, they slammed the Western powers for politicizing the vaccine issue. We should create a global health community for all, summarized the Chinese mandatory in the virtual forum, where also attended via a video conference were the presidents of Kazakhstan and Mongolia. During his intervention in the Eastern Economic Forum of Vladivostok, the Russian president announced his intention of launching a permafrost monitoring system before the year's end. Permafrost is the frozen ground in glacial regions that retains greenhouse gases, which cause climate change. On another issue, Putin proposed organizing an international expedition to the Arctic, where the scientific station is in North Pole is. И все это угрожает нашим союзникам и соседям. А если иметь в виду, что у нас St. Kitts and Nevis has achieved a successful pandemic response, as reported by Hazel Lowe's, Chief Medical Officer, and Cameron Wilkinson, Medical Chief of Staff, health authorities in the Federation.
Now, in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis, to date we have reported a total of 1,148 confirmed cases of COVID-19, more specifically 169 cases in Nevis and 979 cases in St. Kitts. And this is between last year, March 2020 to present. Now, of these, 645 cases have fully recovered. So at present, we are currently monitoring 499 active cases.
We are currently going through what we consider our third wave of infection. We started to see our numbers rise from August 15 this year, having emerged from a second wave that we experienced between May 19 to July 12. We believe, though, that we are beginning to plateau, as the figures that we are seeing daily, they are no longer rising but are plateauing, and hopefully we'll begin to see a fall over the next week or two.
Recent studies confirmed that over 70% of COVID-19 infections in Sao Paulo were caused by the Delta variant. Local authorities added that of the samples taken within the framework of the study, only 28.4% corresponded to the Gamma variant. This confirms the predictions of epidemiologists who stated that the Delta variant had surpassed the Gamma variant first detected in Manaus. São Paulo is one of the hardest hit regions of Brazil, with the hospital systems on the brink of collapse and many facing oxygen shortages in different occasions. The World Health Organization laid down on Thursday that 80% of the African countries will not succeed in vaccinating at least 10% of their population against the COVID-19 by the end of September. It is likely that 42 out of the 54 African nations will not reach the 10% of inhabitants vaccination plan for this month if the current rate of supply and application continues, pointed out the WHO's regional office for Africa. Only 9 countries in the continent, among them South Africa, Morocco, and Tunisia, have delivered up to the standards set by the World Health Assembly in May 2021. Only short of 5% of people in all of Africa have received the first shot of any authorized vaccine, while nearly 3% of inhabitants in the whole continent are fully immunized, according to official statistics. The setback explained the WHO is due mostly to the inequality in vaccine distribution and non-involvement from countries with higher pharmaceutical and medical development. President Cyril Ramaphosa on Friday urged all South Africans to get vaccinated against COVID-19 as one of the main tools in tackling the pandemic, stressing more needed to be done to educate people and fight vaccine hesitancy.
Outbreak of coronavirus pandemic in our country in March of last year, more than 82,000 people are known to have succumbed to the disease in our country, and nearly 2.8 million people are known to have been infected. This virus has caused massive damage to the economy. It has disrupted education and increased levels of poverty and unemployment. When combined with other preventative measures such as mask wearing and social distancing, the COVID-19 vaccine is the most effective instrument that we have to prevent deaths, reduce infections, and restore the economic and social life of our country.
We have more stories coming up after this financial break. Welcome back. The Syrian anti-air defense repelled on Friday a new Israeli attack carried out by combat planes near the capital, Damascus. According to the Syrian Ministry of Defense, the rockets were fired at 1:26 a.m. local time by combat planes that overflew Lebanese airspace. After the beginning of the conflict in Syria 2011, Israel often attacks military or civilian targets in the Mideastern country to block the fast advance of the Syrian army toward the hideaways of the armed and radical opposition. Repression from Israeli occupation forces left a one dead person and 15 injured in the Gaza Strip. Ahmad Saleh died of shots that came from Israel's regular occupation forces in the east of the Strip. Other 15 protesters, 5 of them children, were injured during the repressive practices that the state of Israel has condoned and promoted for so long in Palestinian land. Several protesters received the impacts of live ammunition. 10 suffered asphyxiation for breathing in tear gas. The Palestinian gathering demanded the end of the blockade imposed on Gaza by Israel, which extends now 14 years. The protests near the border approximate a 3 weeks mark, with so far 1 person dead and 80 injured by Israeli forces. In Thailand, many continue to protest, demanding the Prime Minister's leave over his mismanagement of the coronavirus pandemic. Hundreds of protesters blocked the main roads of Bangkok and other cities of the country. The organizers promised they'd extend actions into the night or until the Prime Minister resigned. On their behalf, government representatives claim that the riots and gatherings are being financed by discontent opposition, exiled politicians, and extremist groups that encourage students to join protests. Authorities have banned assemblies of more than 5 individuals and established a curfew at 9 p.m. due to the COVID-19 pandemic, but the demonstrators ignored the measures.
Today's objective is to create a safe space for demonstrations in line with people's rights. Today's main message is to call out those in power, and another message is on monarchy reforms, so that the monarchy can exist within the society and be under the constitution. Actually, the parliament should be a place for hope for the people, but what we are seeing today is hopelessness in parliament. So if the parliament was actually a place for hope for the people, we wouldn't see people coming out onto the streets like this.
Japan's Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga said Friday he will not run for his ruling party's leadership, effectively ending his tenure and throwing wide open the race for the next premier. The shock decision after just a year in office comes with Suga's approval ratings at an all-time low over his government's handling of the response to the pandemic. He said he realized that running for election and handling the virus response would require enormous energy. Suga's renounce suggests a possible return to political instability for Japan, which cycled through prime ministers regularly before the lengthy tenure of his predecessor, Shinzo Abe. The election must be called by late October and held by following month, with the Liberal Democratic Party expected to remain in power, but possibly loss of seats as a result of Suga's unpopularity. The Taliban reported that the announcement of the government in Afghanistan will have to wait a few days more after speculations about the possible undertaking of a violent act preceding Friday's prayers. Bilal Karimi, spokesman of the insurgent group, labeled as improper propaganda and slander the fact that the self-named Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan intends to announce on Friday the formation of the new government. The spokesman also informed that the consultations among Taliban leaders and Afghan politicians over the making of an inclusive government haven't concluded. According to informal versions, Mullah Abdul Baradar, chief of the Taliban's political office in Qatar, could be the next Afghan president. The European Union announced that it would engage with the Taliban on an operational basis in Kabul in order to oversee evacuations. The European Foreign Policy Chief, Josep Borrell, said on Friday the Taliban must form an inclusive representative government of Afghanistan, allow free access to humanitarian aid, and also allow foreign nationals and Afghans at risk to leave the Central Asian country. In a contradictory way, the diplomat made clear the 27-nation bloc had no plans to recognize a government led by the insurgents.
In order to support the Afghan population, we will have to engage with the new government in Afghanistan, which doesn't mean recognition. It's an operational engagement. And this operational engagement will increase depending on the behavior of this government. And in order to measure the behavior, we need benchmarks. We will judge the behavior, and so will engagement, according with the commitment of the Afghan government for Afghanistan not to serve as a base for the export of terrorism to other countries. Second, the respect for human rights, in particular women's rights, the rule of law, and freedom of the media.
Meanwhile, China's officials affirm Beijing's embassy in Kabul remains in normal operations. The spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry also faced the media to reiterate that the Asian giant hopes the Taliban will establish an open and inclusive government in Afghanistan.
China's embassy in Afghanistan is an important channel for exchanges between the two countries, and it is in normal operation. We hope the Taliban will establish an open and inclusive political structure, pursue moderate and stable domestic and foreign policy, and make a clean break with all terrorist groups, as well as having friendly relations with the world, especially neighboring countries.
We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at TeleSUR English. You can also follow us on social media for all the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Ray Gomez. I thank you for watching.